Isolation, purification. For the first time, secure from the pests, of the weapon that any fleet or army on earth, bear them with their own. We shall prevail.
From the Great Basin to the Rockies to the four corners of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, this is KMMU, Main Street Media Utah, coming to you live. You can find us on Rumble, YouTube, Twitter X, and our website, kmmu.org. Please join our host, Goud Maragani, for the Goud Crowd. Hello, Utah, and welcome to the Goud Crowd. In local news, for those of you who are still unaware, there's a proposed gondola project in Little Cottonwood Canyon. It's a transport system that would take skiers and snowboarders up the canyon to Snowbird and Alta ski resorts. In theory, the gondola would be a zero-emission alternative to driving personal vehicles up and down the canyon to the lifts. However, the project has raised a controversy about massive state funding. In December, Save Our Canyons, a local nonprofit group, filed a lawsuit against Utah, challenging the decision to build the gondola, estimated to cost Utah taxpayers $1.4 billion. Goud has the story.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Goud Crowd. I'm Goud. That's quite the intro. So we are going to talk about the gondola today, but we're actually going to talk about some of the build up to what before the gondola, because I think to really understand why they proposed a gondola, you actually have to go back and review what's called the Mountain Accord. And so in a few minutes, we will have a caller that will help us walk through some parts of the Mountain Accord. What I have learned about it is that there is a lot to it. There are a lot of people that were involved in it, prominent politicians like Ben McAdams, although I guess maybe he's not that prominent anymore, at least he used to be, and Jason Chaffetz, and there's a lot of players in Utah politics who were tied into that Mountain Accord. And I think the biggest issue with it is that it was like this public-private partnership, and it ended up a citizens group filed a lawsuit against them for not filing the Open and Public Meetings Act. And it turned out that they were correct, that even though they were spending taxpayer money and having these meetings and making decisions, they were not doing things like having public comment, making minutes of their meetings, and recording the meetings. So, and so the question, I think maybe one of the questions that'll come up as we do this topic, and it'll take us multiple weeks, because I just think I don't want to spend 2 hours talking about it. That's a little bit too long, but we'll do kind of segments every week, walking through different pieces of it. And so today we're just going to talk about the relation, like why is the Mountain Accord important? when you're evaluating the gondola. And that we'll have John Bennet talking about that today. He is, give me a second here. He's the former executive director of the Utah Quality Growth. Hold on. It's the former executive director of the Utah Quality Growth Commission and manager of the Lee Ray McAllister Critical Land Conservation Fund. And then he was also part of a group of concerned citizens who investigated Mountain Accord and whether it followed state transparency laws. But once he comes in, I'll let him introduce himself. We're also going to talk about Senator Plum and her continuing efforts to intimidate and silence me. And so on that note, I would like to say welcome to the State Bureau of Investigation. I learned last week that they are listening to the radio show and that they were combing through all of my social media accounts to see if they could find anything to get me on. You know, turns out that even they had to admit every single thing that I posted and said is protected by the First Amendment. So, oops. At this point, they shouldn't be bothering me anymore, but you know, we're the most corrupt state in the country, and what you get with that is it looks like the next step in that corruption is weaponizing our law enforcement. So for all of you who are still asleep at home, I wish you luck. It looks like, you know, I think at some point this comes after you as well. We're going to also talk about how investment firms are gobbling up homes in Utah. There was a good, you know, a couple of representative, or is she a rep? She's a Democrat. Oh, Galen Benyon. She proposed a bill to deal with this, as did Representative Clancy, and both of them failed. And it's unfortunate. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'll also talk about Salt Lake City's bad road designs and some issues with how they are changing roads throughout the city in ways that violate the International Fire Code and putting their residents at risk of not being able to get the help they need if there is a fire. And, you know, unfortunately, the city is full of a lot of leftists who are not going to be persuaded by facts. And so they'll go on defending this because, you know, they want to see bikes everywhere and they want slowed traffic. And so when, you know, at some point, there'll probably be a fire. It'll probably be bad. And then instead of taking it out on their own officials who screwed up their streets, they will ask the rest of us for a bailout. And they'll probably get it. But the reality is at that point, we should just be like, well, you voted for the people you voted for, you know, you get what you get. But hopefully you know, that's why our state legislature should actually step in and handle the problem. I think, unfortunately, they actually buckled. Now, before we get to the Mountain Accord, I want to talk about one thing, and that is Ukraine. I think this week, a lot of you probably saw that Zelensky was in the White House and he got a little beat down by Trump and Vance, which I loved. But here's what he said, and I think this is important for people to understand. Here,
and daughters exactly the same way as...
I'll play this little clip for you. It's a quick clip.
The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way.
This is Zelensky talking. They're using a female interpreter, which is kind of funny. Let's see.
As we are sending their sons and daughters to war. And
let's see. This is very frustrating. Okay, so here's the deal. He's talking about how you know, like there's a lot of Utahns that support the war in Ukraine, and you know, Utah actually is the state with one of the lowest accession rates into the military, and so the vast majority of people do not have family members in the military. It's kind of disconcerting. And a lot of those people support the war in Ukraine. And I'll give you examples. Mitt Romney, big supporter of the Ukraine war. I still can't figure it out, but he had 5 sons and not one of them joined the military. And so I find that to be weird. John Curtis has 6 kids. As far as I can tell, none of them are in the military. Jeff Stenquist, he was a former representative, big supporter of the Ukraine war. I haven't seen anything saying any of his kids or families in the military. They support this continued pointless war where they're essentially sending their men into a meat grinder to be killed. That's all this is at this point. And now you have these European countries talking about how they're going to fill in as the US says, we're done, right? Trump is basically like, we're done. This peace, there needs to be peace. You have to come up with a peace deal. A peace deal will require you to give up land, right? Too bad. That's how this works at this point. And you're not going to NATO because it would be like you'd be an absolute idiot to let them into NATO when half their country's been taken over by Russia. That immediately puts us into a war footing. So the European countries, who, by the way, don't actually contribute their fair share to NATO, are all now talking about how they're going to send troops and put boots on the ground in Ukraine. They're doing this for a reason, because their goal, what they're trying to do, is they want Russia to attack them, and then they're going to try to invoke Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which would force us to then come to their mutual defense. Now, I think there's a question, though, of whether they can do that if it's not in a NATO country and they haven't been attacked. They're actually voluntarily going in to do this. But if that's a risk, I actually think we should leave NATO, because frankly, I'm not sure that it serves a real purpose at this point. A lot of the European countries are no longer really Western democracies in the way that we are. They don't have free speech. They don't have freedom of religion. I don't know that I really want to. I don't know if I ever want Americans to go and fight for a country like the UK, where they throw people in jail for memes, or Germany, where they control speech. Why would I want that? And why would you want that? This isn't really. I think all we're doing at this point is, number one, we're subsidizing them so that they can have their massive welfare states, and we're just setting ourselves up to be put into to end up in a war. And so, hold on, my producer just told me to. Here we go. There's the link I was trying to play. And so my warning to those of you in Utah is to think about it this way. There are videos online of these men in Ukraine walking around in their village or whatever, and then basically getting abducted by their military recruiters and they're being taken to the front lines. That's horrific, and they're not able to go say bye to their families. So these men, they have mothers and fathers, they probably have siblings, they might have husbands or wives, whatever. I mean, depending on if they're gay or straight, could have children. And you're actually supporting them being abducted and just sent to the front lines to die for a pointless war. At some point, you're the problem. And actually, I think there's some of those people talk about this idea of, we're fighting for a democracy. Ukraine's not a democracy. They canceled their elections. They don't have a free press, and they actually got rid of a whole religion. The Russian Orthodox Church was canceled. So I just think, some of you out there that think this is a good idea, you are asking for problems, and you're asking for a situation. There are warmongers, a lot of Utah warmongers, like a lot, and even outside Utah, who profit from war, and so they will constantly convince you that this is a good idea. It's not a good idea. It's not a winnable war, meaning that there's just no point to it. And it's not even in our interest. So I don't even care if it's winnable. I don't care if Ukraine is part of Russia, if Ukraine is an independent country. Do not care. don't want to hear about it anymore. And I will just note that Matthew 5:9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. What Trump is doing is what Jesus would have done, not what the Jeff Stenquist and John Curtis and the Mitt Romneys are trying to do. That's not what Jesus didn't want war. And so I support Trump. I hope you guys do too. I think he's on to the right track. All right. Well, that's my piece. I just hope people understand that if you support the war in Ukraine, you are setting yourselves up to have to send your kids over there at some point, because the goal of those people running it is to start World War III. Okay. I think we have John on. So
Goud, yes. I have John on the line. Go ahead, John.
Hello.
Hey, John. How are you?
Hey, good. Goud, how are you doing?
I'm good. Okay. Can you tell us about your background and how you got involved with the Mountain Accord?
Sure. So for 17 years, I worked in the governor's office, Office of Planning and Budget, as a planner. And for 15 of those years, I was the director of the Utah Quality Growth Commission and the manager of the Lee Rand McAllister Critical Land Conservation Fund. And part of my assignment in that was to work with local governments. And so I attended several meetings of Mountain Accord in that capacity. And while I was there, one time I was unable to attend, and I called the executive director and asked if they could send me a copy of the recording, because I wanted to stay up on what was going on. And they indicated that they weren't recording them and that they weren't taking minutes of them because they didn't have to. That they'd been told by Tim Gill, the county attorney, that wasn't required. And that got me thinking about it. This happened pretty much at the end of Mountain Accord, the last few meetings and the last few months. I talked with several people about it. Never quite understood that, because my understanding of the Open and Public Meetings Act was that would have been required. Anyway, moving on, left the governor's office, and then I worked with a number of folks on my free time, and we started to kind of look at Mountain Accord, what it was all about, where it came from, which resulted in, ultimately at the end of the day, a ruling from a court in Utah that they in fact were subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act, and a statement at a lunch where I invited Laney Jones, the executive director of Mountain Accord, to lunch. He told me that they chose not to follow the Open and Public Meetings Act because they believed that if they did that, they wouldn't get the things that they wanted out of the ski resorts and some of their other partners. And okay. So I guess the question, what's all that got to do with the gondola?
Yeah, can you actually hold on for 1 second? Can we just pause? Can you talk more about what the Mountain Accord is?
Sure. It's 10 years old now. In 2015, Mountain Accord was signed. 2 years before that, they started work, and they held a number of meetings with subcommittees. The idea was to come up with what they called the Accord, which is a list of priorities that they wanted to implement. And among those priorities was a very extensive and expensive transportation solution up Little Cottonwood Canyon. They were talking about, at that point, about a $3 billion investment to build a train up to Alta that would then dig a tunnel through the mountain and have the train go over and deposit people at Brighton as well. That obviously didn't happen, but Mountain Accord is the Accord itself is still in existence and still being pushed by a group called the Central Wasatch Commission, which was created to implement the Accord, the Mountain Accord as it was written. And so, and we're seeing as part of that's still being in existence and still being used, that many of the statistics and studies that were quoted in this purpose and need statement of the environmental impact statement that justifies the gondola come out of Mountain Accord, and they're quoted that way in the report. So if anyone wants to go find that and read that, you can look at the justification for doing it, which is what's called the purpose and need statement. Has a number of situations where a number of quotes from Mountain Accord in terms of either studies that they commissioned or the Accord itself. And they use that as a justification for this now $1 or $1.5 billion gondola going up the canyon. So the same justifications that were used to propose the train going up the canyon are now being used to support the gondola going up the canyon as well.
Okay. For listeners, can you talk about or talk about why that's important? Why does it matter that they used the conclusions from the Mountain Accord for the justification for the gondola in that environmental impact statement?
Right. So I just said it was done in 2015. It's 10 years old. Why does anybody care? The answer is that they're using this 10-year-old study to justify that, but that all of the material that came out of Mountain Accord is likely illegal. And the reason it's likely illegal is, as I talked earlier, that they didn't follow the Open and Public Meetings Act. They didn't follow the state's transparency law when they created the Accord. And so consequently, and they were required to do so, despite all of their protestations to the contrary, the judge said they were required to support or they should have been following the Open and Public Meetings Act. So you can look at that and say, okay, so why does that matter? Well, if Mountain Accord was illegal, then the things that came out of it are the fruit of a poison tree. And so we shouldn't be justifying $1 billion in expenses to build a gondola with information that was created from a flawed and illegal process. And the fact that UDOT has chosen to quote from Mountain Accord and the studies and the information that Mountain Accord supplied 10 years ago for justifying that is kind of shocking, because they know or should have known that the judge had ruled that they were responsible for following the Open and Public Meetings Act, and that they simply chose not to. And then they sought out help from Sim Gill almost a year later to get support for this notion that they've been expressing that they didn't have to follow the Open and Public Meetings Act.
Can you talk about that? Can you talk about that some more? The Sim Gill piece of this?
Oh, sure. So, as I said, there were a group of us who, just private citizens, were interested in how we were spending 10 or 12 million. That was about 10 million in state funds. So everybody in Utah was affected by this, because money came from the state legislature to pay about 10 million, and then another 2 million from local governments. We're spending $12 million in public money without following the transparency laws. And I recognize, and I think others as well, in fact, I know others as well, that if Sim Gill was right and that they didn't have to follow the Open and Public Meetings Act, he argued that because the private ski resorts were part of the group, that when you have a private organization involved, you didn't have to follow the Open and Public Meetings Act. It would only apply if you had only public entities involved. Well, that, of course, was an option for any local government that wanted to spend money and not have to do it in public, to simply involve a private entity as part of that, and then they can get out from under it. So that was a terrible idea, a very terrible idea, and a lot of us were concerned that this would actually gut the Open and Public Meetings Act if that were allowed to stand. And so the way that Sim Gill was asked to do that was interesting. One of the gentlemen that I worked with sent an email to to the district attorney's office asking them to explain why Mountain Accord was not subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act, because the Open and Public Meetings Act, or because we had been told by Mountain Accord staff that Sim Gill had said they were not subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. And the chief deputy to Sim Gill wrote an email back in response to that and said, we never told them that. And then 19 days later, they wrote a letter saying, here's why they're not subject. So that question that we asked them prompted Sim Gill to write this letter. And the result of that was that they could then take that letter around and say, see, we're not subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. And you have this bad interpretation of law. We were told, not me, but the folks who actually sued were told later that if they hadn't done it, the Attorney General would have sued because it was going to gut the Open and Public Meetings Act to make it absolutely worthless. There would have been no point in having the act if you could circumvent it in such an egregious way.
Oh, wow. Well, talk about, I think the auditor also had an opinion about whether the Mountain Accord was subject to OPMO. Is that correct?
Right. So the Accord was released in July of 2015. The letter from Sim Gill didn't come out until May of 2016, so almost a year later, about 10 months later. The same person who wrote the letter to Sim Gill that resulted, or the email to Sim Gill that resulted in the two responses. First, we didn't tell anybody that they weren't subject to it, and then an actual justification for why they weren't subject to it. He also wrote a letter then to John Dougal, who was then the state auditor, and said, Mr. Auditor, they're telling us they're not subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act, and they've written this letter. Here's the facts as we understand them. What do you have to say? Now, we chose John Dougal for two reasons. One, he's known to be something of a bulldog on protecting public money. But two, one of the things that he and his office did was to work with local governments to understand how they were supposed to implement the Open and Public Meetings Act. So they had the attorneys general who worked in his office were some of the experts related to the Open and Public Meetings Act. So we asked him, and of course he turned it over to his attorneys to answer. And their answer was, no, this is an undertaking that is permitted and is created using something called the Interlocal Cooperation Act, which is an act that allows local governments to cooperate with each other and to spend money while they're doing that. But it requires that the Interlocal Cooperation Act requires that every undertaking done under that act, using the provisions of that act, was subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. That then created an interesting problem because you had the county attorney of Salt Lake County saying they're not subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. You had the state auditor saying, no, they are subject. And so it became clear to a group of landowners in Big Cottonwood Canyon that the only way to resolve this was to have a lawsuit. And so they filed a lawsuit, and as part of that lawsuit, Judge Laura Scott ruled that the state auditor was correct in his interpretation and that Sim Gill was wrong, and that they were, in fact, subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. Now, remember, all of that happened on July 10th, 2017, so that's 2 years after the Accord was released. I know that date because that's my birthday. So on my birthday in 2017, they issued this ruling. The judge issued this ruling and stated that Mountain Accord was subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act.
All right. So, I'm only laughing because I was wondering how you remembered a date that specifically out of all these dates. So it's a good explanation.
And that's the reason is because it was my birthday. And so where we are is that we know that Mountain Accord was subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. We know they didn't follow the act, and I personally know that because when they said Mountain Accord was done, I went to the state archive and said, "Do you have any documents?" And they said no. And they went out and gathered them up or requested them because under state law, anytime one of these interlocal cooperation entities folds up, all the records are supposed to be sent to the state archive. So they asked for all of the records of Mountain Accord. And they were unable, in all of the records that they gathered from all the participating entities, to find anywhere where there were any approved minutes or any recordings of any of the meetings. Both of those two things are required under the Open and Public Meetings Act. A local government, if you're having a city council meeting, for example, that's supposed to be recorded, at least an audio recording. They can do video if they want to. And then they're supposed to also have written minutes. And the written minutes are supposed to be approved, and they become the official record of the meeting. So that applies anytime you're spending public money. And that was what John Dougal said, and that's what the court agreed to, was anytime you're spending public money, you have that responsibility to follow the Open and Public Meetings Act. And here we had $12 million over 2 years that was spent creating this organization and then doing this work, and none of that was recorded anywhere. Since then, the Wildlife Commission has put some notes up, but they're not approved minutes. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
So opponents of what you're saying would respond, at least some of them, by saying, well, the findings of the Mountain Accord were then adopted by the Central Wasatch Committee or Commission, and that actually ameliorates the problems that you're talking about with the idea of the fruit of the poisonous tree. How would you respond to that?
So I'm not an attorney, but as I read the Open and Public Meetings Act, the requirement is that if, for example, if you hold a city council meeting and take a vote, and then you discover that the recorder was not working, the act says you have to go back and hold the meeting again. It doesn't say that you can create a new entity and have them take a stab at adopting the things that you came up with, and then say, okay, so now this is legal because this new entity. That if you ask them, they'll say we're not Mountain Accord. So they don't want to be hard as Mountain Accord. They just want to implement the Accord. So the way that I say is look at the act. The act says that the problem that they have is that all of this questioning of this occurred after they finished their work. That's not entirely true. We asked them about it, but they released this, and then it was only then that Sim Gill, 10 months after the fact, gave this official ruling that he thought they weren't subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act, which gave them cover. And so all of the succeeding events were to prove that that was not the case, so that they would be under a requirement to go back and recreate at least the last meeting where all of this was adopted. They needed to go back and create as Mountain Accord and do that, not as some other organization. That's the way I respond.
Okay. I want to go back to something you said earlier. I think you were talking about Lainey Jones and how she said to you that the only way that they felt they could get what they wanted was by not following OPMA. Is an example of that the proposal in the Mountain Accord for the land exchanges, where the Forest Service would exchange certain parcels of land with the ski resorts. Is that one example of what she was talking about?
Yes. And there are three parts to that. The first is that even today, the the Central Wasatch Commission is still pushing for a new federal designation in those canyons. They're talking about creating a recreation and conservation district or something like that, recreation and conservation area in the canyon, which would have its own staff and its own management process. And again, a lot of us who heard about that said that doesn't make sense, because that would make that potentially could make it very difficult for the ski resorts to operate long term. Because if you get someone in there who says, I don't care about the economic benefits of skiing, I think that skiing is causing damage to the watershed, and therefore we should not renew their leases, that could happen. In order to get ski resorts on board to agree to this, they said, well, what we'll do is that we will go to Congress and we'll ask Congress to accept a land exchange where you can take these old mining claims that you have up on the mountain that are too steep to develop anyway, and you can trade those to the Forest Service, and in return, the Forest Service will be required to deed over to you the land under all the buildings. So all the buildings at all the ski resorts in the canyons are on public land, and they have long-term leases for the land, and the buildings, they have permission to build on the public land, but they don't own the land itself. And so if they got a chance to own the land, they could then develop that land much more easily and make a lot of money, potentially building hotels, etc. And they were told, in fact, that by Salt Lake City Public Utilities, that if they agreed to this, that there would be additional water made available to them to do what they needed to do, whether it was snowmaking or for development. And so this seemed to be a way. So the ski resorts were acting potentially against their own interests by creating an entity that might decide that the conservation values were more important than the recreation values, and make it more difficult in terms of the regulations of that land, make it more difficult to continue the skiing operations. And so why would the ski resorts go along with that? Well, you give them an opportunity to make a lot of money, and then if the skiing ends and the hotels are still there or the condos are still there, that's not going to be their fault because the skiing ended. And so the people who bought it would be on the hook, but there still would be a great deal of money potentially available from those land trades. At least that's the way it appears. They didn't say that up front, but when you read through what the Accord was intending to do, why would you give them their base camps if you weren't going to let them develop it? So that's essentially the issue. The irony of this, Goud, is that many of the people who are now opposing the gondola were supporters of Mountain Accord.
We'll talk more about that. Can you give some examples of people who are opposed to the gondola today and supported the Accord?
Well, you take an organization like Save Our Canyons, which has been talking about how bad the gondola would be for the watershed. But at the time, 10 years ago, they were avid supporters of Mountain Accord because I think they wanted that extra layer of federal control in the canyon. I don't know why. I'm speculating. But it's just interesting that they signed on to the Accord knowing that the Accord was calling for a transportation solution, calling for a train, calling for all of those things. And that the likely outcome of that, unless they were just naive, the outcome of that they had to see was that would bring more people there and more investment if you follow through on the land trades and built the train. Yet they were all in for Mountain Accord. You look at the people who signed it. Governor Herbert signed it. He later said, "I only signed it because I thought that because they told me that this was the only way we could keep talking about it." And again, I worked for Governor Herbert. He's a friend. I won't say that he wasn't telling the truth. I'm just saying that that's not what the Accord said. So I do think it's interesting. Yeah. But you had Dave Arcand, you had Friends of Alpha, you had all of these kinds of people. There were people that the organizations themselves sometimes signed on, and then there were people who were known to associate with those organizations that signed on as individuals. And there were lots of people who were given an opportunity to sign on to the Accord who jumped at the chance because they thought it was an interesting idea.
Okay.
But now, many of those same people are opposing the gondola.
Okay. I'd like you to unpack the term federal designation. And, as someone who lives here, that just makes a red flag go off for me. I know we have a lot of efforts in Utah to actually move federal land into state control. And this sounds like you'd actually be taking state or locally owned land and moving it into federal control. Maybe talk to the audience more about what federal designation meant.
Sure. So what that means is right now, those canyons are forest land, which is, I don't know how deep you want me to go, but the forest is a designated use of the land, right?
Okay.
The land that's managed by the U.S. Forest Service. But some of the land up there is wilderness area, and that's an additional designation. And with wilderness area comes a whole bunch of rules about what can happen on that land. So you have the land that's just ordinary forest land, which is available for people to hike, and then you have forest land where people can hike on the forest, but you can only use your foot, you can only hike or ride horses, and since horses are not allowed in the canyon, it's only people who are strong enough and wealthy enough to afford to take the time that are going to go in those wilderness areas, because it requires you to be healthy and carry everything in your backpack and all of that stuff.
Okay.
But that's an example of an existing designation of forest land that puts additional kinds of regulations on it. A national park, for example, was taken out of just the land that's just in federal ownership, which is mostly now BLM land, and was created as a national park. And as a national park, it has a whole new management system in its own step.
Okay.
There are a group of different kinds of, for example, national recreation areas. We have in Utah national recreation areas. At Flaming Gorge, for example, is a national recreation area. We have, so this does, and that of course has its own management team and its own set of rules and regulations, because its focus is on recreation, but it has to protect the water that's used for various purposes in the lake.
Okay.
But this would then, over and above what the forest management plan is that's adopted by the U.S. Forest, the Wasatch Cache National Forest,
Okay.
This would create a new designation, a national recreation and conservation area, which would then have additional regulations over and above what that is. So it would make it much more difficult to use the plan for anything that was not what the members of the, depending upon which who is in the White House and who is running the place, it might not be a problem. But if you have others running it, they might decide in that case that it's a recreation area, yes, but it's also a conservation area, and we're going to promote the conservation values in a way that's different from the recreation values, and so we're going to redo the management plans, and potentially that could make it difficult for the ski resorts to make a living, because they might say, well, we're going to have no parking along the road.
Okay.
We're going to have, the number of people on the slopes at any one time. You can go down the list of things that they might say, all of this to benefit the watershed or to benefit other conservation values in the canyon. So that's what a federal designation is. Now, interestingly enough, one of the arguments that you always hear about we need to do something in the canyon is because of the number of visitors.
Right.
We get 2 million visitors a year or something like that, similar to what they get in Yellowstone. I've heard some people say that.
Okay.
And I did a study personally. I went through and looked at every national recreation area or every national conservation area, every national park or national monument, to see if the number of visitors declined when you had a national recreation area. And in fact, there's nowhere I can see where that has ever happened. In fact, if you have a special designation, these special designations, people look at it and they say, well, that must be a special place. I'm going to go see it. And so the number of visitors increases. One of the examples in Utah is the Bears Ears National Monument, which prior to designation would get something in the neighborhood of 40,000 visitors a year. And after designation is getting like 500,000 to 400,000 to 500,000 or something in that range. And so 10 times as much visitation after the designation as before. And, to protect the archaeological value in that area is important. But you think it would be easier to do that if you didn't have 10 times as many people there. Or maybe just 10 times better, I don't know. But anyway, that's the argument. So this was what the federal designation does. Now, the interesting thing about the federal designation is that Jason Chaffetz, who...
Oh, no, we won't talk about that yet, John. We're not going to talk about that yet.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to talk. That's going to be for next week.
Okay, so next week we'll talk more. Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk more.
We'll come back next week and we'll talk more of these issues.
Okay, so I think that is actually a good place to end this discussion for today. Thank you for giving us kind of an inkling of what the Mountain Accord was about and some really good background information. And just for listeners out there, next week, we're going to talk about Jason Chaffetz and the federal designation issue and how he went to Congress to try to get I think it's Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons, the federal designation. Is that right, John?
I think that's right, yeah.
So we'll talk more about that. And there's a great response from another representative to it. So that'll be our Mountain Accord discussion for this week. If you want to call in, if there's anyone who wants to call in and talk about it, you can do that. But John, thank you very much for coming on, and we will talk to you next week.
Okay, I'm gonna run off to something else, so I'll hang up, but I'll look forward to next week.
Great, thank you.
Bye.
Okay, I believe we have another caller. Okay, our next topic though, so just so you guys know, next week we're going to talk more about Mountain Accord. I hope that gave you kind of a good background about it, and we're going to go into the issue of Jason Chaffetz and the federal designation. I think it's kind of...
Yeah, I'm here.
Sorry about the delay. Goud was going on about the gondola. So hang on a second. You'll be able to hear him, and I'll drop you in.
All right.
Thanks for your patience. Hang on.
Hello. Yeah, I guess he's not there yet. All right. So our next topic, though, is going to be, we're going to talk more about Senator Jennifer Plum and her efforts to silence me. But I thought it would be good to have Ryan on. He's also Lady MAGA, although we'll let him talk about that because he understands the trans issue really well. And are you there, Ryan?
Hang on.
Okay.
Well,
he understands the issue.
Here you go. Go ahead, Ryan. Say hello.
All right. Hello, Goud.
Hey, Ryan. How are you doing?
I'm great. It's good to be on your show. I always have to start by thanking you for doing this show and trying to make a difference in Utah. Most people in Utah are very complacent, so your voice is needed, and I just want everybody listening to know that Goud is a true patriot.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that coming from you. And it's been such a long time since I've seen you.
Yeah.
Well, just so everybody knows, we watched the Oscars at a friend's house last night. That was actually a really good time. Were there anything that was a highlight for you, Ryan, from the Oscars that you want to talk about?
Honestly, I think it's a lot of self-aggrandizement and elitist butt kissing. And I just found out that in order for a film to be nominated for Best Picture, it has to meet DEI requirements of diversity and representation. So we have no idea what films that were made out there were the absolute best. And I looked up the film that won Best Picture, and I looked on IMDb, and it was like language, severe, graphic nudity throughout. So it sounds like it's just a bunch of filth and a bunch of filthy people worshiping each other. But we had fun making fun of the outfits and making mean comments about all the presenters. It was brilliant.
God, I cannot remember you missed the one, like the Best Actor acceptance speech where he got up there and was lecturing everybody about his woke ideology. I can't remember that guy's name. He's the one. He's got the really big nose. He's a very talented actor, but it was. Yeah, I find it so annoying. Like
the thing is, yeah. It's just the audacity that these liberal multimillionaires have to lecture us, the American people, like the ones wearing Ukraine pins and expecting the American taxpayer and the average American worker to, fight the elite, to tax the rich, to eat the rich. Apparently, all of those Oscar people got a $200,000 gift basket.
What?
I barely pull in $50K a year. Yeah, no, these people are so elitist, scumbags. Like Oprah Winfrey on that stage, presenting herself as someone the American people should admire. No. So, celebrity culture and celebrity and athlete worship is, it's just a great distraction that keep people away from what our legislature is doing right now, what Spencer Cox is promoting with his communist, high-density, evil housing powers and developments in our state. So, yeah, I don't know. We had fun just kind of making fun of it, but I have nothing positive to say about any aspect of that show. I was very surprised to see the pro-Palestinian documentary win. I can't believe it was nominated, and I can't believe it won. And I liked that there was the pro-Israel guy and the pro-Palestinian people balanced. I was surprised to see that. So that was interesting.
Yeah, that was interesting. Okay, so here's what I want to talk about. Okay, so I think I told you about how Senator Jennifer Plum has been trying to silence me, right? And
of course,
last week, I actually got a call from the State Bureau of Investigation, and I'll talk in more detail in the call after we're done, but the bottom line was, he said to me, he's listening to the show, so say hi. We've got law enforcement on. And
you communist, hi. You all
I know, right?
Hell, you're scumbags. You don't represent the people of Utah. We are Phil Lyman conservatives. You have been exposed. We see who you are. We see what you are. And you're listening to us. And you will never silence us. You absolute corrupt pieces of garbage. That's what you are.
Isn't it wild? Well, so, but here's this follows my theory.
Somebody like you.
No, here's the thing. It totally follows my theory that liberal white ladies who trans their kids should not be in public office and are totally dangerous. Because not only does Senator Plum destroy her son's mental and physical health in order to get into office and for clout, now she's trying to silence people who expose the fact that she did that to her son, right? And I just think people, if you know people, this is my message to voters. If someone comes to you and says, I have a trans kid, you should not vote for them under any circumstances at all, because all they're in there to do is, number one, to promote the trans agenda, and number two, to silence anybody who tries to oppose the trans agenda or expose them for who they are.
And it's all about them. It's about them. It's not about the child. Now, is this woman's transgender child underage?
No. Her son, who she trans into a daughter, is an adult. So it's not even
transition.
Okay, so I went through this in detail last week, but the first time Senator Plum ran was in 2018. At the time, they reported that she had a teenage son. Then everybody knew she was going to run in 2022. She lost the first time she ran. She lost to Derek Kitchen, right? The second time she ran against him again, she won narrowly. Sometime between 2018 and 2021, sometime between 2018 and 2021, she transed her son. And then in 2021, she started showing up to hearings and stuff and talking about her trans child. I actually know for a fact that there's at least one elected official in Salt Lake City who helped her poor son feminize himself, learn how to walk in heels and stuff like that. But this was all, I believe, done as part of an effort to improve her chances to win election the second time. Because I think what happened is probably her poor son was confused. And she, instead of helping him overcome that confusion, become comfortable in his body, she just encouraged it, went with it, and realized that if she could trans him in that district, which is super leftist, it's the avenues, like that whole area, that she would be a shoo-in to win.
And it looks like she was.
Yeah.
It looks like her plan worked. So yeah, this is okay. So any women listening to this show, this is not meant to offend women in general. I love women, but liberal white women are the demise of Western civilization. If you look at Europe right now, we have Islamists driving cars into Christmas markets. We have stabbings. We have rapes. Sweden is the rape capital of the world. Europe is being terrorized by Islamic and African immigrants who hate them, who live off of their tax dollars, and who are destroying Europe as a whole. What we have are liberal white women like Plum out there shouting, holding signs that say, refugees welcome. So the lunacy of the liberal white woman is not just annoying. It's not just something we oppose. It is literally, culturally suicidal. So what she is promoting by politicizing this alleged daughter of hers, what she is doing is promoting behaviors and drugs and surgeries that increase the likelihood of suicide in people that do this. This is demonstrably true. Suicide is higher among trans people in general. Plum would blame people like you and me for being so-called transphobes. But the reality is what she is doing is destroying lives by promoting something that mutilates a body, that permanently renders someone infertile. They'll never have children. They'll never have offspring. and their entire world is going to be a chemical drug dependency until the day they die. And if they don't stay on these drugs, which have massive side effects, they're going to morph back into a freakazoid version of themselves before they began these drugs. So this woman is not only predatorily using her child for political clout, she is promoting something that is intrinsically dangerous and evil for the people who are convinced to do it. I don't believe adults should not have the right to do what they want, but promoting it and acting like it's okay is it's not okay. It's the same as promoting anorexia or promoting the use of heroin because people identify as heroin users. So it's just,
Right.
This woman is a predator. She is a charlatan. She is a hypocrite. She is a grifter. She is a manipulator. And she is an evil woman. She's an evil woman. She doesn't belong in Utah. She's spitting in the face of all of those like you and me who embrace the traditional values of this state. Yeah, we're gay, but we defend the traditional way of life. We defend traditional religious freedom. We stand for the reality of two genders. We don't want our sexuality shoved on other people. She wants transgenderism to be politically and by law forced on the people of Utah. And that's what she wants. She wants us to be to have her son go into women's locker rooms and women's bathrooms, whether or not he has removed his male genitalia, which I'm guessing he has not, because the majority of so-called trans women choose to keep their penis because their fetish is better served by advertising that they still have their ding-a-ling wing-long.
Yeah, this is it's exactly right, actually. And I'll just tell you, like, when I talked to the agent from the State Bureau of Investigation, I actually told him, I said, I feel bad for her son. I don't know if you understand this, but it is personal to me in that, as a gay man, like we tend to have a lot of us at least have a little bit, there's some things that are a little bit more effeminate about us. And so when you're a kid, people can target you. And especially today, like this wouldn't have happened in the 80s or 90s when I grew up. But today, if they see a boy who's a little bit effeminate, instead of thinking of, like you might think, oh, maybe he'll be gay one day, whatever. They think, oh, he must be a girl. He likes dolls. He must be a girl. He likes pink. He must be a girl. And I understand how dangerous that is, because instead of letting that boy figure out who he is, and if he ends up being gay, letting him live a nice, healthy life as a gay man, they trans the person, ruin their life, ruin their mental health and their physical health forever, and turn them into a fetish. That's all that is. Because, it's just a fetish.
Irreversible damage. I mean, I was a little kid. I loved Barbies. I loved Disney Princess. I mean, to this day, today I'm a drag queen. I love to dress up. I love the theatrics of, feminine hair and makeup. It's a lot of fun. It's a theatrical performing endeavor that I do. But I'm not a woman. I never was. I never wanted to be. And as a kid, I was different. I was more gentle. I was more sensitive. And so what these predators are doing is exploiting their child's vulnerabilities or, lighthearted interests. I mean, if a kid wants to put on a Cinderella dress and spin around for a minute or two, it's just a fleeting moment. It really is not significant. They should not be sexualizing their child in the first place. And by considering the aspects of transgenderism, they are sexualizing their child. It is a form of sexual abuse. I mean, people always talk about, molestation or things like that. But anytime you alter, remove, or permanently damage the sex organs or the sexual capacities of a person, that is a form of sexual abuse. Her son is not going to have fully functional sexual feelings or capabilities anymore. And that is a form of self-abuse. If her son was an adult when he did it, it's self-sexual abuse. But that's what people don't realize, is by fixating on a child's sexual anatomy and claiming that they're the opposite gender, you are in fact sexualizing them. It's sick, it's twisted, it's evil. And I just don't even know how we're having these conversations. I still feel shocked every time we have to stand up against this. Even in the 2010s, her son would not have been trans. He may have been gay, or he may have just been a David Bowie type. You know, he likes makeup. He's a little more gender non-conforming and, you know, a little more feminine. But what we're dealing with is predators and people who are exploiters. And this woman is going to pay the karmic consequences of what she's done and the evil that she's promoting into the minds of vulnerable people who have a child who is different. They're looking for answers, and they're going to look at her as an elected official, as an authority figure, not realizing that she's actually a deep, dark, evil predator. And to the communists who are listening to us right now, all of this is our opinion, and we have the right to share our opinion. And any accusations Goud might make, or any accusations I may make, we're going to say the word alleged. Everything I have said in this conversation is alleged. And I'm on the record saying that allegedly is the word I will use to describe anything that I've said in this interview. But I stand by my opinion, and I stand and here and testify as a gay man who was different when I was younger. If I had been born today to a predator like this plum woman, this monster, I would have been transitioned. I would have been given drugs, and I would have said yes. And I would have agreed with the manipulators and the predators and the groomers who told me you're actually a girl. And it would have happened to me. And I just thank God that I was born before all of this predatory grooming nonsense began. And she needs to leave Utah. You don't deserve Utah. We are a wonderful state. We're rapidly becoming an awful state, quite frankly, because of people like her and woke Mormons. But overall, Utah has been a wonderful place to live because of conservatism. And then you bring, you have a nice conservative cake that's like a beautiful wedding cake that once was Utah. And we have monsters like her who come into our state and inject, fecal matter into the cake. That's what she is. She is a poison. She is a cancer. She is dangerous. And no, I'm serious. There's nothing more evil than promoting transgenderism, especially, I'm guessing she promotes it in children and talks about protecting trans youth, meaning children and minors. She's a predator. And I hope she hears this. And I hope she repents of her evil ways. I hope she has a conversation with herself and realizes how evil, deep down she knows it's evil. That's why they have to promote it and push it and convince others to validate their evil, because they're insecure. If she didn't feel intrinsically that she's evil and what she's doing is wrong, she would quietly just live her life. Instead, she has to scream at the masses and try and be validated by others to convince herself that she is not evil, when in fact she is she's going to face eternal consequences with God for what she's doing right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for calling in, Ryan. That's why it's fun to talk to you, because you actually understand me.
Next time we talk about her, I'll tell you what I really think. Okay.
Okay. Cool. Thank you very much for calling in. We appreciate it.
I'm so glad. Thank you for exposing her, and do not let these little communists sent by people like Troy Williams intimidate you. You have an army behind you of common sense people, and we appreciate you. So never back down, Goud.
Thank you. Okay, well, so I'm going to give you guys all an update. So basically what happened is last week I was driving back from an undisclosed location, and I got a call from an agent with the State Bureau of Investigation. And here's the thing, I want to talk about this because I believe I should be transparent with all of you about what's going on in the background, so that you can come along on the ride, whatever this ride is. It's like sometimes it feels like a horror show. And I was thinking about it when I got the call, like, I can't believe how many efforts there have been made to silence me, right? First, they got me fired from my job, and that was Equality Utah. And I believe that there were Republican elected officials who encouraged or supported that. And then on top of that, you also had, hold on, I'll hide this for a second. And then after that didn't work, Amy Winder Newton, who is allegedly a Republican, and according to her, dozens of Republican elected officials contacted the National Log Cabin Republicans to get our local log cabin chapter dissolved. At the time, I ran the Utah Log Cabin Republicans. And so these elected officials, and I was being actually based, meaning that I would criticize my own side. And instead of interacting or countering the things that we were saying, they actually went and they got the organization shut down, which I think is just the height of corruption and the height of problems. And that didn't work to silence me. And so now they're trying this law enforcement method. The problem that they have is it's not going to work, because even the State Bureau of Investigation officer admitted that every single thing that I have said, and he apparently listens to the show now, and he went through all of my social media, everything I said is protected by the First Amendment. And so really our conversation should have been over at that point, but it continued, and I find the whole thing bizarre. But so, and one other thing on this Equality Utah piece. So, Amy Winder Newton contacted the National Log Cabin Republicans. So we were a conservative gay group. She has never done that against Equality Utah or any left-wing gay group. Why do you think that is, if you're listening? Like, what is the purpose of that? Why would you, if you're a Republican, why would you contact the conservative Republican group to get the local chapter shut down and not do it to the liberal one? Does that not seem like she is not a Republican to you? And by the way, she's probably going to run for the state central committee again. And I would just recommend to people, you should not vote for that woman. So I'm driving back again from this undisclosed location, and I get this call. This agent from the State Bureau of Investigation, which I had never heard of, but I guess it's like Utah's version of the FBI. It tells me that he's been listening to that. He listened to all of my shows and looked at all of my social media. And then he also read all my social media posts. And he said, as far as I can tell, everything is covered by the First Amendment. And what he meant is he's looking for speech that is not protected by the First Amendment. And so, for example, a true threat, it's called a true threat, would not be protected by the First Amendment. But I've never threatened anybody, hence there's nothing there. And everything that I've said about Senator Plum is true, 100% true. I've actually gone through it with evidence showing you how she transed her son for clout. And she did what a lot of liberal white ladies do that. And they do it when they want to help their electoral prospects or help their career, or make their friends like them better, or whatever it is. A lot of times they do that by sacrificing their sons to the trans god, or whatever they call it. So now on one thing, I want to say this. If he is watching today, I take this attitude towards people who don't like me or are trying to destroy my life. That Cardi B attitude. Now I'm hoping this will play. Let's see here.
And I want to thank my haters too, because
Okay, I'm gonna send this to my producer. Clearly, I can't get anything to work here. Hold on. Okay, while he tees that up, just so you guys know, you're listening to KMMU Mainstream Media. We're live on YouTube, Rumble, X, and our website, kmmu.org. And so thanks for listening. And as you can see, it's a little bit of a spicy show. Now, when my producer gets the clip up, we'll let him do it because I seem to have bandwidth problems, and I don't know why. But, I take the Cardi B attitude towards the State Bureau of Investigation listening. It just helps me. So it means I got more views. And so please share to all your little agent friends. And maybe even share with Senator Plum. She could listen too. Maybe she'll learn something about what child abuse is, which is what she did to her son. And, maybe ways that she could now come to terms with it. Because at some point, what's going to happen is her son's going to realize the mistake he made. And that's not going to end well. Here we go. Okay. Ready?
and I want to thank my haters too, because
It's freezing for you too.
and I want to thank my haters too, because
Are we not going to be able to get it to work, Mr. Producer?
I'm gonna let it sit for a second and then we'll try again. Hang on. Here we go.
Okay. This bandwidth thing, if you're listening, is kind of crazy.
and I want to thank my haters too, because they be downloading my stuff so they can hear it and talk crap about it. Benefits me. And I want to thank my haters too, because they be downloading my stuff so they can hear it and talk crap about it, but it benefits me.
Wow.
And I want to thank my haters too, because
There. Now we got it.
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so that was the point. If you're a part of the State Bureau of Investigation, you're watching, it benefits me. So I'm happy you're good. Keep watching. Okay, so what he said, what was interesting is he said that he disagreed with my interpretation of the electronic communications harassment statute. As many of you know, I've sent her a letter last week, I think, explaining to her why she was wrong. And I actually think the agent is wrong as well. So if you read we're talking about this part of it, and we're actually talking about this specifically, but and so what this says is that we start here really. A person is guilty of electronic communication harassment and subject to prosecution in the jurisdiction where the communication originated or was received if, with intent to intimidate, abuse, threaten, harass, frighten, or disrupt the electronic communications of another, the person, after the recipient has requested or informed the person not to contact the recipient, and the person repeatedly or continuously contacts the electronic communication device of the recipient, or causes an electronic communication device of the recipient to ring or to receive other notification of attempted contact by means of electronic communication. The agent is focused on this section. specifically 2A, little 2, capital A and capital B. And so what he's saying is, oh, because she told you not to contact her anymore. So if you tag her in a post, it causes her phone to ding. Oh, you can put her through. Looks like we got another call. I think though, so let's take a pause for a second here. And so but the problem that the agent, just give me 1 second, Mr. Producer. The problem that the agent missed is that this only comes into play if you've met the first part of it, meaning that you have the intent to intimidate, abuse, threaten, harass. I don't meet the intent requirements. As I explained to him, the only reason I tag her is so that people that are reading know who I'm talking about. Because, there's more than one Jennifer Plum. It's a little bit different if it's me, for example. So if you typed Goud Maragani, that's a pretty unique name, even among Indians. And so it would basically come back to me. But this is very different. And so that's the only reason I tag her, is so that readers know who I'm talking about. So I don't meet the intent of the statute, which means the second piece doesn't apply like he thinks. He's wrong. Okay, Mr. Producer, you can put the caller through. Okay.
Give it another try, Tracy. Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, Goud, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. How are you, Tracy?
Good. I didn't know they were going after you again. That's news to me. I haven't talked to you in a while, so wow.
I mean, it's all good. They're wrong. I mean, the thing is, there's nothing for them to do at this point because, like he called me and he told me basically everything I've said is protected by the First Amendment. So whatever. But he said the one thing that they disagree with me on is that the tagging piece. So they said if I tag her on social media, then I guess they'll look into whether they should take further action. But so we've agreed that I won't tag her for right now, and I'm gonna research this to see if he's correct, and then I'll go back and forth with him about that issue. But I figure, in the meantime, I feel like I pretty much said my piece about Senator Jennifer Plum, right? She transed her kids, she's a child abuser.
Yeah.
She shouldn't be in office.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Speaking of office, I was going to call and tell you if you heard that Tony McKay has announced that she is running as
I did.
Looking to be the mayor of Riverton.
Correct. We've got, yes, so we're on Riverton News. So if anyone's listening on Riverton, she just announced today, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna send. Hold on, I'll send the producer her announcement so he can play it. But what do you think? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, I think no. This is a dangerous. For her to even run, to me, is unethical. It's like they're trying to make their living off the government. Like that's going to be their business. That's what they're doing. I mean, Dan McKay is already a senator. There is no need for her to run as mayor. It's a conflict to me. You don't. Then you could be enforcing and passing more laws through your city, through your state. Like, it's a huge conflict. And I hope people realize that when they think about, election. And it's not mean. I notice a lot of people think that that's mean to say, oh, they won't do anything bad. You shouldn't even open the door for anything that's a conflict of interest. I mean, you have a developer, he's a developer, and a senator, and now you're going to, she's already a city council, so I'm against it. What are your thoughts?
I saw the announcement. I'll just say, like, on a personal level, I think she's nice. I don't really have any issues with her on that. I do see the conflict issue though. And maybe that's the thing to separate for people is, like, we're not saying that Tony McKay's a bad person. She's actually,
right.
She's very pleasant, very nice. In that couple, actually, she's probably the nicer of the two. If we're gonna be real about it, I don't think she's attacked constituents like Dan has. So I almost think it would be useful if one of them got out of public office. So maybe Dan should resign from the Senate and then let her run for mayor. Then I don't really have the same conflict issue. Would that address your concern?
Yeah, if he got totally out of, I guess, even the business of being a developer, because I guess as mayor you can't really do anything, but just him trying to force that change on those zoning regulations for his lot, that just gives me concern. Like, he tried to force it. He took it all the way and to try to usurp the actual regulations that are right there. And then he just said, well, I'll just go change the state law and you're gonna have to let me do what I want anyway. So
yeah, but to be fair about that, Tracy, to her, she recused herself from that decision, right?
She did. And you're right, she is nice. She is nice, but there's just been some very weird actions lately. And I actually think Dan McKay can be actually funny, but I'm not a fan of running your business through the government and off the backs of the people.
Yeah, I mean, we have two couples in Riverton doing that. It's them and then the Perucci's. So, maybe this is like a Riverton problem. We need to take it on head on. Like, it's almost like there's just nobody else can fill these positions. It's just the two families.
Hello friends, this is Tawny McKay and I have an exciting announcement. I love serving our community and I've decided to run to be the next Riverton City Mayor. If you live in Riverton, I'd like to invite you to my campaign kickoff party next week. So I actually don't love public speaking, but I do love doing service. And so we've decided to assemble 21,000 meals and partner with the Jordan Education Foundation to distribute those meals through our local school food pantries, to the Riverton and Harriman food pantry, and to the homeless. I hope you can join us. Thanks. Hello, friends.
So I'm just going to tell you, when I first listened to this announcement, I didn't realize she was saying meals. So I don't know. Is that like a Utah accent? Does he say meals? Have you heard that? Yeah, you see the way she said it. The first time she said it, I was like, "What? What are they gonna do?" It took me a minute. It's meals.
Yeah, I don't know.
Even the Mr. Producer says, "I wanted to know what mills were too." I'd like to know. Here's the thing. I want to be fair about this. So I agree with you that there's a conflict issue here, but I'd like to hear her vision for what her mayorship would look like. And another piece. So I want to hear more about it. And the other thing is, I am totally confused about the piece where she says she doesn't like public speaking. I feel like if you don't like public speaking, then why are you in elected office? Isn't that kind of a big portion of it? Is that you just keep talking so people can listen to you blow hot air and then you make a bunch of promises you're not going to keep, right? That seems to be pretty standard around here. And then because you just talk so much, talk, and then then you run for office again, and we all try to be like, you didn't keep your promises. Well, here's new ones I'm going to make or whatever. Because that piece surprised me too.
Yeah, that was pretty odd. Maybe it was because she doesn't like to tell people things and then never do them. I don't know. Because I thought that was odd. She did. I mean, her video was fine. I didn't think she did any weird misspeaking or whatever. But yeah, I thought that was a little bit different too. Why would you run for office?
Yeah, exactly. Only public speaking. Don't run for office. There's plenty of ways to serve. But I guess we'll have
exactly.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to see where we'll have to. Maybe I can call. Maybe I'll see if she'll come on the show to talk about it, because, like I said, I'm interested to hear. I want to give her a fair shot. And plus, I don't even know who else is running. Have you gotten any inkling that anybody will run against her?
Yeah, I do. I've had people call.
Okay.
So I guess that's probably where I'm basing my opinion too. Is I just wish more people would get involved, because it's just not a good idea to have family in office where they can impact your life from all levels. That is a conflict. And I know Utahns are very trusting, and I know there's never any intent to hurt anybody or do wrong, but it does. You end up crossing the line. And I don't know. I just think she should have probably considered that different.
Yeah. I feel this has been an open secret though, that she's going to run. And I think unless I don't know who else would run against her. So not knowing that, I can't really think of someone that would have the heft to go against her and win. Granted, like we live in the district that was a very competitive city council district because the high density housing issue was a big one. And so maybe, I don't know where she stands on that. We know that Dan wants to increase density on his lot that's in Riverton, and also that he wants to, I think he was saying he was going to support that bill that'll give you the right to put an ADU on your property, kind of like what California has. And so those are probably issues that an opponent would want to bring up, unless she's going to take the opposite viewpoint of her husband, which is possible. I don't know how much credibility I would give that though.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Dan's actions up on the Hill will probably impact her in her race, because he's done some not nice things, and I don't know how well he's liked anymore, I think they just count on the signatures now, and signature gathering will get them through. And that's still unconstitutional, so it's still my goal to prove it. And I just wish people would go and read the actual law or the case too, because that case in Utah at the Utah Supreme Court in 2016 says it, but they just continue to misapply it, and it's almost like a tyrannical. Like, I don't care what the Supreme Court says, and I kind of saw that notion this time up during the session. I mean, they were making bills that it was way beyond their legislative reach. That we have 3 different forms of branches of government, and they were way overreaching into the Utah Supreme Court branch, the judicial branch, making laws that you can't stop. You can't do an injunction. You get it. If you're receiving the harm, then they stop the injunction. There's a lot of legislative overreach, and I don't think the people are happy with them right now.
Yeah, I could see that. It'll be interesting to see though how that impacts the 26 races. I know that I had someone contact me, or some people contact me about how they want to run against Dan McKay. So maybe the answer, yeah. I mean, so like if people are unhappy with him, which I would think that they are, because I feel like he does a lot of legislation that I don't think a lot of people like. Plus, I do think the attacks on constituents are just weird. Like, he's always been nice to me, so I don't have a personal, like personally he's fine with me, but I was at a town hall once where he just went after a constituent, and it was so bad. It was so uncomfortable, and someone actually stood up And it was about the flag issue, but all the person said was, you know, why did you support changing the flag when the majority of Utahns were against it? And that just, I don't know what it was. It wasn't just him either. I mean, Candace Perucci went crazy. She told this whole, what was crazy about her story is she told how the Utah flag was created. Cause I was sitting there and I was like, I don't really feel that I care about this issue. And then she said, you know, this was created in a bar by a Canadian. And then the pioneers, or they added all these American flags to it because they were so desperate to get the acceptance of the federal government. And, you know, they did this as part of trying to become a state. And I left that meeting, and then she said, you know, I am a descendant of the pioneers, and I just think this new flag reflects us better. And I left that meeting thinking, well, number one, that old flag sounds super interesting now. Like, who would have thought that Utah's flag was made by drunk people in a bar? Like, whoa, that's actually interesting. And then, when Dan got up, he just went after that constituent, and it was crazy. And someone actually stood up. I don't remember if were you at that meeting? And someone stood up and was like, that was completely uncalled for and you need to apologize. And he actually did. So but then when I brought it up once on X with him, and he responded to me and said, you weren't at that meeting. I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, and he said something like, the meeting was in Lehigh. That's what he said. And I was like, wait, I was at a meeting in Riverton where you attacked a constituent. Is there more than one meeting where you did this? Oh my God. So I feel like
I've seen him be really mean to people, but he's never been mean. Like, he's never done anything like that to me.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's why I think if one of those people comes forward and is like, hey, he totally berated me and attacked me for asking him a question, I think that could make him vulnerable even amongst Utahns, because even though a lot of them they want to be nice, and what he did was not nice. So
yeah, and what he did to Mike Brown wasn't good either. It was bad.
Yeah, exactly.
When he took Mike Brown out of he had him drug out of the meeting because he had a We the People shirt on, or sticker. It was terrible. Instead of standing up and saying, okay, this has gotten out of hand, it went completely opposite.
Yeah. That's another example of that. So, and just so people know, we're talking about this discussion about Tawny McKay, who just announced today that she's running for the mayor of Riverton. That will be this fall, and she's one of the people running to replace Trent Staggs, who's currently our mayor. Okay. Any closing thoughts? You got any thoughts on any legislation people should be watching? I think we're in the last week of the session now.
Well, we're doomed. These guys have passed some really bad laws. That SB, I think it's 377, is terrible. And you can't get anything for them to understand. It's almost like they get offended if you say, hey, that's a bad bill. They take this, like, Utah politics is very childish. And they create this fake, like, thing. It's, if you go against their bill or say, hey, that's not a very good bill, you don't say it in a way that they like you to. Then they, like, spin it and they get offended and say you're mean and you should ask in a different way. It's the oddest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. It's very childish behavior. There was an attorney I talked to that lived back east, and when he found out about how they will just, because you can't win at convention, they'll just gather signatures and veto your nomination. They read that and they go, this is the most childish application of this law I've ever seen in my entire life. I go, I know. He goes, it's very childish behavior. I said, that is Utah. Utah gets very offensive in politics. And if you say anything that hurts one of their feelings about, they personally take it. They don't know how to take constructive criticism. It appears to me, most of them.
Yeah.
But they've passed a lot of unconstitutional bills. So it's going to hurt us.
Okay. Well, on that note, thank you for calling in. Talk to you next time.
I'll talk to you later.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Yeah, it looks like we're doomed. Okay. Well, that was a good call. Let me finish what I was saying about this State Bureau of Investigation guy. I thought, so he disagrees with my interpretation of the Electronic Communications Harassment Act. Fine. Well, like I said with Tracy, we'll continue this conversation with him. There was one piece I thought was really interesting, and just so everybody, if you weren't listening before, we've left this at, I am not going to tag her on social media for now. And until I feel a need to, if I feel that I need to, I'll go back to him and we'll continue our discussion, probably in writing. And what I thought was kind of interesting, though, is he said to me, look, all she did in her message to you was ask you not to tag her. And I said, that is not true. She had multiple comments in there saying what I can and cannot talk about. And specifically, she said, I cannot talk about her family. And I said, if you understand the situation, she uses her son, whom she has transed and turned into a quote unquote daughter, for political purposes. She used her son, again, whose mental and physical health she destroyed, to run for office and win in 22. And anytime there's legislation trying to eradicate a piece of the trans agenda, Senator Plum trots out her poor son again and again and again and again. And all she wants to do is to silence me and others from talking about it, because she knows what she did was wrong. But what she was expecting is kind of that, yes, queen, yes, like that type of a discussion from people that are constantly congratulating her for being such a good mother, for transing her son, when the opposite should be true. Our only purpose should be to get her out of office. And frankly, I don't even think she should be a doctor. She is a doctor right now at the University of Utah, who I think makes around $400,000 a year in a taxpayer-funded compensation package. If I understand correctly from some of her testimony, she's a pediatrician. I would not want that woman around my kids if I had any, because she will be promoting the trans agenda to your children as well. Because when you understand this, people who trans their children, they have to go out and promote this agenda to others, because the goal is they never want their child to regret what happened. Because if they do, you should understand that will be devastating to them. It will completely wreck their world. If her son ever comes to her and says, I regret what you did to me, I wish I had never done this, there's nothing there's no going back. She destroyed everything about him. Everything that made him a young man, she destroyed it. And so I don't know how you live with that guilt if the child comes back to you and tells you that they regret it, and that they blame you for it. Like, what do you do at that point? That instead of being a good parent, you were, going with the latest thing, and that latest thing destroyed your child's physical and mental health. So that's kind of where that's at. The other piece I learned is that it wasn't just Senator Plum who complained about me. It was also Representative Hayes, and if you know anything about Representative Sahara Hayes, she transed her partner. When she first met him, he was a boy, and then, and his name was Landon, and now his name is Lily, and he pretends to be a woman. So, basically what it means, in her case, they were already adults when this happened. The other piece with just so sorry to go back to this, but the other piece with Jennifer Plum is that transition started when her son was a minor. And so she was a state employee at the time, which means that we as taxpayers paid for that to happen. We funded it. We funded the sterilization and mutilation, of her son. And it was probably done at the University of Utah Transgender Health Clinic. So, and I think it's the Adolescent Transgender Health Clinic. So understand, you and I paid to destroy her son's physical and mental health like that. So, I would love to be able to confirm that. I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, but HIPAA is going to probably protect whether she took her son there. But I can tell you that is the main transgender clinic, and it is close to her house, and she works there. So take it to the bank. That's probably where she got it done. Now, Sahara Hayes, she transed her adult partner. So he probably started to have mental health problems. Maybe it was from being with her. I don't know. And instead of helping him overcome them and becoming comfortable in his birth sex again, she helped him destroy his physical body and his mental health and succumb to his mental health problems. And now he runs around pretending to be a girl. And I'll tell you, some elected officials don't even realize that he is a man. So that's but I think, because I've talked to some of the older heterosexual men that have met Lily, his name's Lily. And, but it's kind of funny because I was like, that's a man. And one of my friends was like, that is? And I thought, yeah, you're not even paying attention. It's not that Lily passes. It's that this representative is just the older heterosexual guy. He's just not even thinking about it. Doesn't even realize it. Okay. We have about 11 minutes left. I'm going to close out, I think, on this last little issue here. I had one other one I want to talk about, but we'll just pause it till next week. It shouldn't be the end of the world. I'm going to send over, well, no, okay. I want to talk about houses being purchased by entities in Utah. So, there's a lot of discussion about how housing is unaffordable. And earlier I kind of touched on this, but both Representative Clancy and Representative Benyon proposed bills that would restrict the ability of commercial entities to buy properties, right? And I want to give both of them credit because I'll be honest with you, I was a Clancy skeptic, but I got to be honest, I'm kind of impressed with him. So, and I'm kind of a skeptic because I think he's very young, and I get a little bit. I don't understand how someone who's 27 would really understand life and issues. It's pretty young, but he seems to be, pretty wise for his age, I'll say. So he had a bill that would have prevented corporations from purchasing single-family homes in the state. Okay. Now, according to these quote-unquote experts, investors account for less than 3% of the state's single-family rental stock. This is very specifically worded. Now he says so his bill, he canned his bill because he wasn't getting the support he needed, but he did say there's a lot of grassroots support for this, said Clancy, who rents and would like to buy a house himself one day. So he's motivated. He's probably experiencing high housing prices and low inventory. And also, to be totally fair about this, high interest rates. I think that's impacting a lot of people's ability to buy a home. So he acknowledged that he ran into opposition from a number of groups. We started out like two freight trains coming at each other, Clancy said. So then this guy Ross, then Representative Benyon failed to advance her bill, which was similar and would have put rules around home sales in Salt Lake County to discourage investors from buying them. So she was a little bit more narrow than his bill. Both bills are well-intentioned, said Ross Ford, executive director of the Utah Home Builders Association. But he added they both pose problems. Okay. To have someone come in and say, we're going to control how a sale goes, we're going to try and control the private market with government forces generally doesn't work, Ford said. Ford also maintained neither bill would have reduced the cost of housing. The statewide median price for a home in Utah is around $500,000. Now, Clancy said he's going to try to work on this again next session. Great. And what I want to note, though, is what Mr. Ford said. He said, again, to have someone come in and say, we're going to control how a sale goes, we're going to try and control the private market with government forces generally doesn't work. What everybody needs to understand is that when hedge funds, and that's really your big issue here, come in and try to buy single family homes, that is not actually a free market transaction. Unlike you and every other normal person who has to go to a bank, who has to pay the prevailing interest rates and try to afford a home doing that, these hedge funds get access to cheap money. And so when they come in, they're able to compete against like a Tyler Clancy. So this is a young man, he's married, and I assume that they want to have kids, they want to have a home, but the hedge fund will have a massive advantage over someone like him because they're getting their money at a cheaper rate than he is. And then also they're coming at the transaction with cash because they have access to all of these extremely wealthy people, many of whom, by the way, are grifting off the government to get their money. And they're basically pricing out this young couple. And, you know, a lot of you can probably relate to that because that young couple represents your own children and their ability to buy a home in the state where you live. Because I think a lot of, you know, I have noticed this at least, you know, where I live. I mean, look, I don't live by my parents. My parents live in San Diego, but when I go and I talk to my neighbors, they have 4 to 6 kids each, and they all want their kids to be able to move back to Utah. But they recognize that that's going to be very difficult. We live in Riverton. The prices are high. I think, honestly, they're too high. And the interest rates are too high, which makes the homes unaffordable. If the interest rates were what they were when I bought my place, I think around 3%, Tyler Clancy and his wife could afford a house. Right? Because their buying power would increase massively. But we're not going to fix that issue. I don't even know if we'll ever fix it because, frankly, too many people want free stuff from the government, and the interest rates are trying to hold down inflation, which is being driven by the fact that the federal government is printing money. So if you're looking around and you're saying to yourself, I wish my kids could afford to live in Utah, then you should be against the government printing money, which means you need to be against deficits, and you need them to start instead cutting spending until they bring the budget into balance. We're not there, and I don't know if we'll get there. But so another piece of this is that you also want to control the demand side of the market. And what I mean by that is you don't want your young children who are trying to start their lives out to have to compete against these hedge funds and investment groups. And let me just add this, Mr. Ford guy says it's 3% of the market. This language is weird though. Like I said earlier, they said, hold on. Experts say those investors account for less than 3% of the state's single family rental stock. I'm not sure what that means, but I found this article. Let me see here. It's by CoreLogic. And they said, so they are not unnamed experts, but you know, like a data group. And they said that in Utah, this is in 2023, 30% of the homes were purchased by investors. That's a huge difference from the 3% cited in that article. And then if you go down here, this is what an investor is defined as an entity, individual or corporate, that has retained 3 or more properties simultaneously within the past 10 years. So this would be your bigger, so this is kind of getting away from individual investors that might have more than one home. So like, for example, I own 2 places. I have one place in DC that I bought years ago, And then I have my house in Riverton. I'm not really like an investor. Those are places I lived, so I own them. But this is looking at these people that are going out and buying homes for investment reasons. But you can see we're much higher than 3% according to what CoreLogic is saying. I would love to see where that 3% number came from that is cited by KSL versus the 30% in CoreLogic, because you can see how if 30% of our homes are being snapped up by investors, how are people supposed to afford homes? How are these young couples supposed to be able to move to Utah and buy a home with a yard where they can have children and build a life? I don't understand this. I think what Clancy and what Representatives Clancy and Bennion were trying to do were good bills. We need to get a handle of this. And in fact, I'll close by saying this, like when I ran for the state house seat, one of my proposals was to ban hedge funds from buying homes in Utah, single family homes. And I will say amongst the delegates, it was actually very popular. They liked it. They understood this issue that there is not a free market when you're competing against a hedge fund. You can't compete. And the other piece of this is that it's actually difficult to figure out which homes they're buying, because they don't, it's not, BlackRock doesn't go and buy a home with their name on the title. They're using front groups. They're using front people. In the same way, China does the same thing. China, you're not going to go and find a piece of land that says owned by the People's Republic of China or owned by the Chinese Communist Party. They're using front people and front groups to make those purchases. And so what I would say is I think this was a good effort, and hopefully in the next session this will come back. But I think for voters out there, you need to start, if you care about, let me just put it this way, if you care about your kids' ability to be able to move back to Utah, buy a home and build a life, and to do it somewhere that's close by you, you've got to elect better people into our legislature. If you look at the bills that have passed this session, a lot of them are not about everyday people. They're about the moneyed interests that fund the politicians that are elected to our legislature. And so I would just urge people, you have to vet these people better. And you have to be willing to withhold your vote if somebody that is, for example, going to go up there and let hedge funds buy homes does that. Don't vote for them. You don't owe it to anyone to vote for someone who's going to do something that you fundamentally don't agree with. And so I'll just close with that. Hopefully, as we go forward, we could start to get better legislators that reflect the grassroots of both parties, really. Because honestly, this issue, I believe, is actually popular among Democrats and Republicans. And so with that, we will close the Goud crowd for this week. Thank you for listening. I'll just say that all opinions that were, all opinions expressed represent the view of the host and the guests themselves, and not KMMU.org. So we will see you next time. Thanks for listening. Goud is out.